today's property roast, we're roasting Paul Schroder, the CEO of AustralianSuper, and his comments on housing. Let's go.
I'd just like to say that I think the big burning both productivity and cost of living problem is housing. And I think we keep underestimating how worrying housing is. So if you could buy a house in 1970 for 2 times a family's income, and you could buy a house in 1997 for 3 times a house's income, and now it's 6.5 times, and in Sydney it's 9 times. So if you can't find safe and secure housing, you can't be optimistic and positive and energetic, and everything feels like a drag.
I agree with that. I totally agree with that. The housing crisis is a huge drag on productivity. However, although his comments aligns with common concerns among economists, especially from other big banks, ANP, Westpac, ANZ, the fact that most people sink most of their money into mortgages and home equity, and the fact that this capital isn't readily available for more productive investments or entrepreneurship. However, it is ironic coming from Mr. Schroder over here, given AustralianSuper itself has significant capital invested in housing and real estate. I'll show you the receipts. From their 2024 annual report available on their website, so you can fact check it. If you scroll down to page 28, on page 28, as you can see from the investment options that AustralianSuper does, they have 4.2% invested in Australian property, both commercial and real estate. Now you might be saying, Q, dude, in the scheme of things, look at international shares, 33%, Australian shares, 24.5%. 4.2% is insignificant, but 4.2% of how much? Moving this to the right-hand side, 165 billion invested domestically. So 4.2% of that is, let's bring in the calculator. All right, we have 165 billion, 123, right, times 0.042. That's like $6.9 billion invested in Australian real estate. Now, I get what Schroder's saying. A dynamic economy needs capital flowing to innovation and the industries and not just pumping up land values. But AustralianSuper, your company, although it's only 4.2% of $165 billion invested, is also partly fueling the housing crisis in Australia. However, before you roast me, it will be wrong of me to suggest AustralianSuper is redirecting huge resources like what he claimed in his speech from productive uses into property. In fact, going back to what he was saying,
burning both productivity and cost of living problem is housing. And I think we keep underestimating how worrying housing is.
Schroder's remark is a broader policy critique. I get the feeling here that he's hinting that allowing Australians to raid their super for housing, like old mate over here.
Peter Dutton reaffirmed the Coalition's superannuation for housing policy announced during the last election campaign. It was their best policy of the campaign, but they held it back to the last week.
So the campaign is he's allowing Australians to dip into their super for their first property. So they're proposing that they allow people to dip in about up to $50,000 in their personal superannuation fund for their first property. And that is what Schroder is cautioning against.
For some reason. Anyway, the idea is that people would be able to access their own super for a housing deposit to help them get into the market.
And this is where he's hinting at over here, right?
Housing. And I think we keep underestimating how worrying housing is.
Letting Aussies raid their super for housing and these continuing policies like allowing foreign buyers to buy a lot of property in Australia are continuing to inflate housing prices in Australia. And in effect, like he said, worsens the productivity drag of Australia. My verdict is of that part of his speech, I reckon the housing crisis can hurt productivity, and I agree with him. For example, workers stuck in expensive cities with long commutes, less disposable income to spend elsewhere, and Schroder highlighting the microeconomic issue. And what is the microeconomic issue? Well, I believe it's two-sided. For example, according to from his perspective, which he's speaking through AustralianSuper's role, one hand, the fund benefits from high property values. 4.2% is invested in real estate. And of course, that helps boost members' balances and benefits their super. Good on that. But on the other hand, guys, it sees a long-term economic risk if housing remains unaffordable. Thus, I see his point of view. He's urging caution about government making policy that would not further inflate housing demand without fixing supply. Let's move on.
70 for 2 times a family's income. And you could buy a house in 1997 for 3 times a house's income. And now it's 6.5 times. And in Sydney, it's 9 times. Yeah. So if you can't find safe, positive and energetic and everything feels like a drag, I think we should take this. I think this
that is 100%. Like, for example, I've been a mortgage broker for the last 15 years, right? What you can borrow like 15 years ago with set income, like say $50,000, $60,000, right? Compared to using $50,000, $60,000 now, it's like night and day. Like $50,000, $60,000 will probably get you about 800, 900K of lending before. Right now, no way. You'll be lucky to walk out of the bank with $250,000 of lending, right? Maybe $150,000 if you're on $45,000 to $60,000. That's how ridiculous the housing crisis. Anyway, let's.
This is the crisis that's facing Australia that we need to just, not drill, baby, drill. We should build, baby, build.
Build, baby, build. I totally agree. Guys, this is supposed to be a roast on Paul Schroder, but I'm kind of agreeing with him. But there are some elements that, you know, he is representing Australian Super. They are, on the other hand, investing in real estate and in Australian property, which also inflates the housing crisis. But I kind of agree with him because, you know, he's in a tough situation. He's the CEO of Australian Super, but he's also speaking the truth. Let's continue.
And just get housing going as much as we possibly can. And the other thing I want to say about housing is that in the States, all the housing stock, the total housing stock is $50 trillion against an economy of 29 trillion, right? So not even twice. In Australia, because we've ploughed so much money into our houses, it's still the same house, it's just worth so much more, right?
All right. So about that comment, you know, I agree with him. I 100% agree with him. Like, you know, a house is a house, brick and mortar, right? And a block of land. How the heck from like, say 20 years ago, or even like when my parents came, right? My parents came in 1980s, you know, from Vietnam to Australia, and you could buy something in Cabramatta for about $50,000 a house. Right now, for that exact same house, it's like $1.3 million. Like, how the hell did we get there? Is it capital growth or is it speculation? Anyway, let's continue.
Housing's worth 11 trillion here, and a GDP of 3. So theirs is twice, ours is 4 times. So all we've done is just poured all this money into houses, all very well, terrific, painted the front fence and then sold it on to someone, which
there's a lot of like course creators out there. I'll teach you how to buy, renovate, flip, buy this property, cosmetically change it, put a slab of paint, and boom, $50,000, $80,000 more. And it's this system that feeds these course creators telling people how to buy, renovate, flip. Man, like, this is the root cause, which dominoes effects into other people who take advantage of the system to make their moolah.
Deprive the economy of heaps and heaps of productive capital. We've got all this money in our domestic houses and we're not backing business. We're not creating new things. We're not driving productivity. So to me,
he's got a point here. Housing makes up 50 to 60% of household assets, one of the highest ratios in the world. Meanwhile, business investments, aside from the, you know, the mining sector, we get lukewarm treatment. Like small business owners like myself, I deal with a lot of small business owners that run businesses, some of them very entrepreneurial, very lukewarm response in terms of funds allocated here for the SMEs, the SMEs, and the small medium enterprises. And to add merit where merit needs to be given, for Mr. Schroder, in terms of Australian Super, you know, they are backing businesses, right? You can see from here, 24.5%, if you can see, right, over here, I'll zoom in, 24.5% is invested in Australian shares. What does that mean? Money from 175 billion, which is roughly around 42 billion, is used to back Australian businesses. Or you can say back greedy corporations in Australia. You know, same shit, different smell. I don't know. But the argument that Schroder is commenting on is businesses versus property investment. What's more important for Australia right now? Let's keep watching.
I think we should all just be, all of our pants should be on fire about housing, because if our kids can't live safely and securely and...
So yeah, guys, what do you think besides Mr. Schroder's effective hand gestures? What do you think? What's more important in Australia at the moment? Housing and focusing all our productivity on housing, or spreading that productivity on other aspects of Australia? For example, small business owners, supporting small businesses, entrepreneurship. Maybe that will fuel the economy, which will in the end make housing more affordable because people have more moolah. Anyway, before I wrap this roast up, let's look at the comments. So we got here, get rid of negative gearing and the tax the rich. And the Liberal Party want people to use their super to buy housing, like throwing petrol on fire. Yeah, tell that to Mr. $30 million portfolio Dutton over here. This guy's saying, well said, how can we support low income and small business? Everyone is agreeing with Mr. Schroder at the moment. And I totally agree. Like, even though it was a roast, I end up agreeing with him, right? How will our kids, where we as parents, I have 2 boys, 7 and 9, how are we going to end the generational curse in our family if housing gets more and more expensive by the time they hit like in their early 20s or mid 20s, where a house will probably cost about $5 or $6 million. It's probably a dingy house somewhere in Western Sydney, right? Because he said it here, right? He said that
kids can't live safely and securely and then how can you be freed up to think positively about productivity or the future?
How can our kids break free from the generational poverty curse that we currently have passed down by our parents? If the housing crisis gets worse and worse, what are we passing down to our kids? Are we passing down generational wealth, or are we simply passing down generational poverty because we simply can't even get into any type of housing? So guys, jump in the comments, let me know what you think about Mr. Schroder's speech on the Australian Financial Review Business Summit, where he commented about the housing crisis. Let me know in the comments what you think. I'll be sure to reply to every comment. And if you love this property bros, hit subscribe, hit the bell notification for the next video, and hit a thumbs up. And by the way, you notice a bit of a clothing change? Yeah, I accidentally spilled my drink on my shirt. Probably too much hand gesturing. Anyway, I see you in the next property roast.